Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the press conference after the Monetary Policy Council meeting. We have Professor Adam Glabiński, the governor and head of the MPC, as well as MPC members, Professor Jerzy Osiatyński and Professor Eric Won. Governor, please. Indeed, today, it's the 50th MPC meeting without changing rates either way, so maybe we should celebrate. Have to think about this. Maybe next time when we have more journalists. Statement from the meeting of the Monetary Policy Council held on the 14th, 15th of May 2019. The Council decided to keep the NBP interest rates unchanged. Reference rate at 1.5, lombard rate at 2.5, deposit rate at 0.5, rediscount rate at 1.75. Incoming data suggest that global growth in 2019 Q1 continued at a relatively slow pace, although economic conditions have improved somewhat in some of the largest economies. At the same time, sentiment in industry was still weak, with more upbeat signs coming from the service sector. In the euro area, despite a pickup in quarterly GDP growth, the pace of economic activity growth remains relatively slow. In the United States, economic conditions stay strong, and the quarterly GDP growth in 2019 Q1 was higher than in the previous quarter. In China, economic activity growth stabilized at the beginning of the year. Since the beginning of 2019, global oil prices have been rising, which translated into somewhat higher inflation in many countries. Alongside that, core inflation in the external environment of the Polish economy, including in the euro area, has picked up slightly. The European Central Bank is keeping interest rates close to zero, including the deposit rate below zero, and reinvest maturing securities bought under the asset purchase program. The U.S. Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates unchanged. At the same time, the Fed is gradually limiting the pace of its balance sheet reduction. In Poland, economic conditions remain good, although GDP growth in 2019 Q1 was somewhat softer than in the previous quarters. Activity growth is driven by rising consumption, albeit at a slightly lower rate than in previous quarters, fueled by increasing employment and wages, as well as very high consumer sentiment. This is accompanied by a rise in investment. In recent months, consumer price growth has increased, which was accounted for by rising fuel and food prices, as well as higher core inflation. Despite this, inflation continues to run at moderate levels. In the Council's assessment, the outlook for economic conditions in Poland remains favorable. However, in the quarters to come, there will be probably a gradual slowdown in GDP growth. At the same time, inflation will remain at a moderate level, and in the monetary policy transmission horizon will stay close to the target. The Council judges that the current level of interest rates is conducive to keeping the Polish economy on a sustainable growth path and maintaining macroeconomic stability. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please, we're taking your questions. Mr. Tuszyński, Polish Press Agency. Let me start by core inflation being higher, especially that this particular snippet appeared for the first time in quite a long time. So what do you make of it? Do you think that companies are facing increasing costs and they are unable to absorb high costs and compress their margins? Well, we talked about it yesterday and today. We talked about it with analysts, and we concluded that right now core inflation has actually gone back to its normal level given our pace of economic growth. So it is strange that it was so low before. I don't think it's a permanent trend. So we shouldn't. Is there a new trend for core inflation to continue to grow? Well, according to our data, no. So, given the fact that core inflation has been a little bit higher in the last month, so what about inflation path? Is it going to be higher? Well, we don't know. We'll see when we receive the projection. Hard to tell, but right now, no fundamental factors have changed, even though, indeed, inflation is a bit higher. I wouldn't be surprised if the path went up somewhat, and then it may start to slow down. There might be a small increase and then a decrease. Yeah, the previous projection said that inflation would reach its target towards the end of this year, but right now some economists are saying that it will happen mid-year, and then towards the end of the year it could even be close to its tolerance limit. Is it possible? It is possible, but it still wouldn't be alarming, because we would assume that in the following period it would fall back.
Ms. Bartyzel, Dorota Bartyzel, Bloomberg News. I've got a question. What is your reaction, maybe one by one, as regards April inflation? In Bloomberg, 30 analysts, almost 30 analysts have analyzed the situation, and none of them have decided that it would be 2.2%. It was a surprise for the market. Dear Professor, the market and the analysts expected what you would be saying, and this is exactly what you've said. So, you, Professor, and Professor Osiatyński, and Professor Won, and you, dear Governor, please tell us. Yes, we expected different results, but these changes were not immense. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, in May, you always have higher indicators. The same was true of May last year. CPI and core inflation 0.2 above the trend. And most probably, whenever we make extrapolations, we do not always predict this seasonal effect. Of course, you are true. You are right. We were surprised as well. So the Monetary Policy Council didn't differ from the market and analysts in not expecting this increase. But what is at the core of these changes and inflation indicators, CPI and core inflation, is it the result of some change which only happened once, and can the National Bank, the central bank, control it? Is it related to food prices, and you can see it reflected in CPI? Compared to the expectations, we can see a higher growth in prices of services, but not all services, of course, only some types of them. Services controlled by local authorities, for example, those related to waste disposal, for example, some transport services and hotel services, and fuel prices. Thank you. The result of changes in fuel prices. So we've been trying to analyze the effect on inflation. And I don't see any symptoms of immense changes as regards expectations, inflationary expectations in terms of households and businesses. Right. As regards tendencies of commodity prices, especially oil prices, this was a little bit surprising that prices picked up. For 2-3 weeks, we have observed that all prices, for a few days, we've observed price cuts. Now we can see some other changes, and inflation surprised our partners from Visegrad Group, the Czech Republic, for example. But we can see that these figures have stabilized lately, and we can see that these inflationary trends are decreasing. As Governor has mentioned, we are waiting for July projections, and we shall wait and see. And I expect that inflation is going to be within the limits. We are speaking about 2.2%. So it is still below the inflationary target. So I expect it is going to be within the band in the course of the upcoming months. And let's remember about the economic growth above 4%. It is very positive, and this economic growth has been observed for some time, so it is stable. So inflation might be growing, but I believe, as I've mentioned already, that inflation is going to be within the band, within the limits, and below the inflationary target. As regards oil prices, it is difficult to predict changes in these prices, to predict energy price changes and prices of foodstuffs. But there are certain assumptions that we take into account, and the situation is quite positive and promising. We can see high inflation, but also higher growth. Growth is higher, and inflation is a little bit higher. But again, we can see wage growth that has slowed down. We do not see excessive growth of wages, and people were afraid of that. Therefore, there is no aggravation in the labor market. By a few percent, the number of jobs has increased. So there are no problems as regards supply and demand in labor and resources related to migrants from our neighboring country, from the east. So there are no negative changes as such. Right, but as regards expectations on behalf of the European Commission, we are speaking of different countries. We cannot compare our growth with the growth in Romania, because our growth is sustainable. You didn't understand me, Governor. European Commission's forecast shows lower figures compared to other institutions. We believe that we are more realistic. Rafał and me have focused on inflation. What about the fundamental question today? What is the horizon for stability of interest rates in Poland? And to what extent does this surprising figure about April inflation influence the time horizon as regards the stable interest rates? We understand that you focus on inflation because inflation has to be kept in check, and our currency has to be stable. This is our concern. As regards the topic we are discussing, whether it's an optimistic scenario or not depends on the point of view. But until the end of my term in office and the term of office of this Monetary Policy Council, we expect that there will be no changes in interest rates. It's been the 50th meeting of the MPC without changes of interest rates, and this will remain unchanged. Now, economic conditions in Western Europe are a little bit of a concern to us, especially when we speak about our main partner from Western Europe, namely Germany. Economic conditions have improved a little bit in Germany, but the economic conditions are not very positive. So ECB is adjusting its monetary policy, and the ECB has done what is possible, and the situation cannot change overnight. So we are speaking about fight for growth, and there is no concern about growth in inflation, and rates are negative in Germany and in Poland with a certain lag in time. We are heading in the same direction, but there are a few changes. More than 4% of GDP growth is a very good indicator. Even it was below 4%, it would still be good, and inflation is in check, and good situation in the labor market, in real estate market, and in trade. We can see the balanced situation.
So right now, this miracle, economic miracle, is continuing, so may the moment last, let the moment last. And everyone can pray to any God they see fit, that things should continue to be this way. And of course, it's our dream for it to continue till the end of our term in office. And of course, sustainability and stability of interest rates in itself is very important, because it makes the market predictable looking from outside. Our market is stable, predictable, surprisingly so, given the fact that FX rates are fluid and completely, and they are formed completely freely. We have our own currency. Having your own currency, where this currency is stable, its purchasing power is stable, this is amazing, and this is our advantage over a bunch of other countries that we are trying to catch up to. It's hard to tell how long it's going to continue, but I'd say that till the end of our term, if other circumstances are the way they are, or are the way we think they may be, because we're not talking about the war in the Middle East or something like this, because these things, of course, might turn us on our heads, but otherwise, things should be good. Well, Professor Osiatyński, I believe that what's happening with inflation currently may indicate that our process of the inflation impulse petering out, and the fact that the inflation might be close to its upper target, this process may take a little bit longer than I initially thought. And secondly, I prefer to not to share our governor's optimism when we're in our meeting, rather than disagreeing with him in public. The governor, well, we are here to speak freely. But if I'm talking about my own term in office, that's one thing. But when we're talking about the governor's term and the term of other MPC members, I'm not sure. It may not happen. We may not succeed. Well, this is really a remote point in the future, so yes, it's difficult to say anything specific. When it comes to me, I am optimistic. I believe that our economic situation is good. Stable monetary policy is helping our economy, helping our sentiments, and making our fellow countrymen believe in our currency and its strength. It might be thanks to our contribution, at least partially. Our policy of stable interest rates is really favorable. It's well received both by businesses and consumers, as well as foreign investors. They do see that, especially when you look at Polish zloty exchange rate. It's good for our exports. This is exactly what we're talking about here. We want to have real convergence with other more wealthy countries so that we catch up with them and maybe in the future to outperform them, even the mature economies. That's why I believe that our monetary policy is something that could help us, especially also having our own currency is helping us. My question is how prices of energy come into your outlooks and forecasts. You have talked about freezing energy prices for households. So what do you think about prices of energy or electricity in the coming year and how it can impact inflation? Well, that's one of our sources of uncertainty, just like prices of oil or prices of food products. Globally, we cannot foresee, we cannot anticipate anything, even though we do sometimes have conversations with members of our government. But still, we are assuming that things are going to remain the way they are. We are assuming that these prices are going to remain stable. When or if these prices change, then parameters in our model are going to change as well. Before that, we assumed the highest possible level of energy prices, so our model gave us a result that really outraged you, and that's why and also for a number of reasons we've decided to change our assumptions, so you don't have any new assumptions. You haven't modified your assumptions. Well, I don't know, and I don't know what's going on in government in terms of energy prices. I think they are still in discussions, and I believe that those discussions are rather vivid, but we don't know the outcome. And whenever we know the outcome, we're going to take it into account, and it will change our assumptions. Therefore, it will change our outlook on inflation. Professor Osiatyński said that the process of inflation growth petering out may take a little bit longer. So what level of inflation are you expecting to mid-2020 and at the end of 2020? Well, I don't think you should be putting it this way. Professor Osiatyński saying one and the rest of the council saying something else. I think it's not as clear-cut. But indeed, I'm not a dissenting voice within the MPC, and my cautious and prudent outlook is not the only voice of dissent. And to be honest, I cannot answer your question. Regardless of many factors that may not necessarily be disastrous, like, for example, Iran and the conflict there, or the customs war and tariffs war between the states and other regions in the world, they don't have to have a disastrous result for Poland, but there are many factors that are lesser in importance, but still have to be taken into account, like inflation-related expectations. When we talk about inflation, or when you talk about inflation, you're really asking about interest rates. And when you're asking about interest rates, you're asking about the price of money. So when you ask about that, you're wondering which segments of the market are dependent on our decisions, because there are some businesses in Poland who get funded by their parent companies, right? Not really here in Poland. Also, real estate and residential real estate market is important. Right now, we don't see any alarming symptoms, but, well, please forgive me. I'm not going to be bold enough to say anything definite. Well, we were looking at services and prices of services that, well, potentially prices of services may go in a direction that will put us in a tight spot, but, well, right now, nothing very alarming is happening. And, well, some things that we have taken into account haven't happened at all. So I think we should be moderately optimistic and remain calm. There's one more thing that the governor has mentioned. Growth of wages was slower than in the previous month. So this calms us down a little bit. Let me repeat, a little bit, because still wages grow faster than labor productivity. So unit costs are growing. So this means that still margins are eroding, or margins are very tight and tightening. So we don't know how much room there is to squeeze out margins, even though the enterprise sector is pretty liquid and businesses are doing quite well. Still, we have to follow the situation very closely, but still, it's only one of the reasons why I'm not answering your question definitely. We were comparing labor costs, Poland versus other countries, and still there is like a huge gap. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are running out of time. Ms. Bartyzel, and you, a very short question. Let me refer to what has been said already by Governor, that not only Professor Osiatyński has a slightly different opinion. You've mentioned, let me quote, that you have differences in opinion. Are these differences greater than a month ago? No, these disputes are very calm. This inflation growth is not really huge. It is a very slight increase, and we don't know whether this tendency is going to develop for a long period of time. So we are not going to change our monetary policy. If we change it, you will learn it very quickly. You will be informed. And politicians have paid attention to it. Finally, something happened, and it attracted people's attention. Let me also ask you, of course, equilibrium, balance, and economic miracles. Still, we've got two commercial banks that make investors nervous and make the NBP nervous, and it costs a lot. So what is a real risk to the stability of the banking system related to the situation of these two banks? And Financial Stability Commission, is it going to tolerate it? Financial Stability Commission is dealing with it, and the Minister of Finance is dealing with it, not me. In this case, I'm not going to comment on the situation of individual banks. We have a broader perspective, and I must emphasize that we have great stability in the banking sector. Everything is under control. We've got great system of stabilization. We've got 3 institutions plus the Ministry of Finance, and they all manage the situation. Of course, we do collect information and analyze it, but maybe you shall address the Financial Supervision Commission instead of us, because we are the institution that is the institution of the last resort. But we do take care of the situation. And then you've got a boom in the banking sector, and you have to hold a meeting. Right. You've mentioned that Financial Stability Commission has to take care of it in the case of crisis. Is it a critical situation? No. I was saying that should there be a crisis, then this institution will react. And of course, we are collecting information, analyzing information, we exchange information, and we do control the situation. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presence, and see you during the next press conference. Thank you.